Qantas is in damage control,
facing a class action lawsuit.
Customers have complained of poor service
In the wake of multiple scandals.
Cancellations, delays, lost bags. Qantas became one of the biggest stories in corporate Australia after the pandemic, and for all the wrong reasons. Now, a new boss seems to be winning over a lot of those angry Aussie flyers. So how is she doing it? Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones. Welcome to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. Finally, things seem to be going right at Qantas. It may have taken 4 years, but our national carrier's share price is now well above where it was before the pandemic. But how much higher can the flying kangaroo leap? To help answer that and more, Sydney-based transport reporter Angus Whitley is joining me today in our Melbourne studio. Angus, how was your flight?
Yeah, hi Beck. It was, unsurprisingly, it was full. It was a Jetstar flight, and true to form, there were no spare seats on Jetstar, which tells a story in itself, doesn't it, when you look at Qantas's recent results.
And you've recently returned home from a much longer flight to Hong Kong, where you had the opportunity to interview Qantas CEO Vanessa Hudson. How was that?
That was a great opportunity because Vanessa Hudson doesn't do a lot of media. And I don't think she has done any international media, if you can call us that. So it was really a great opportunity to sit down with her, talk about, how she has done what she's clearly done in the last 18 months since she took over. And also, how sustainable is it from here? Mm-hmm. Can she keep doing what she's clearly done? And what levers does she have left to pull? Having really done, a repair job, if you like, so far, given what Qantas was looking like when she took over.
Exactly. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? What state was Qantas in when Hudson took over from Alan Joyce some 18 months ago?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to overstate the problems she inherited from Qantas. If you look back to those days in 2023, pretty much since aviation opened up again after the pandemic, Qantas had struggled to really cope with the overwhelming rebound in demand. So it was an era, you'll remember, an era of high cancellations, of a spike in lost bags. It was delays, that they couldn't get enough really people to staff the demand, to meet the demand. And Alan Joyce even became a kind of byword for a trip that had gone awry. You'd been joiced. If your flight was delayed or cancelled, you'd been joiced. And it really became a pile-on. And then I think probably the straw that broke the camel's back that year was the ACCC, the competition regulator, suing Qantas for allegedly selling tickets on flights that had already been cancelled. They became known as the sort of ghost flights, if you like. So they were financially benefiting from flights that were never going to take off. And as the revulsion at that, I think it's probably not overstating, the revulsion at those kind of claims simmered over, Joyce stepped down 2 months early. And so then we had the introduction of Vanessa Hudson in September 2023 with, all these things to do on her list. And
you've just tripped a memory for me. I remember flying for work when we reopened, and having to wait such a long time for my bags at the carousel was one of the contributing factors to me now only flying carry-on. Just that really long wait at the end of a very long flight. It certainly does leave an impression on flyers. Let's just say that. Let's have a look at the recent success of Qantas, Angus. What specific changes has Vanessa Hudson made since she's taken the reins?
Well, there are cultural changes she's introduced, and there are material changes, and there are resolutions to kind of long-running sores that had been weeping at Qantas. So, first of all, she apologised several times. So she spent the first few weeks just apologising in public to staff, to shareholders, to parliamentarians. And then the little thing she did to sort of refocus Qantas on the things that probably had been neglected was, for instance, in Alan Joyce's internal communications, at the top was the share price, which is a telling statistic to focus on, given that he was accused really of focusing too much on investors. So that was his metric that he communicated to staff. Under Vanessa Hudson, she peeled that back off and she put a metric called on-time performance at the top of her communications to staff, which is basically a gauge of reliability and punctuality. One of the other really interesting things I think about Hudson is her leadership style, and we talked a little about this in the interview in Hong Kong, and we said that what kind of leader are you? And she's really a different kind of airline leader. The typical aviation CEOs we've seen in the past 10 years is sort of a bombastic male, alpha male, outspoken, not dissimilar to Joyce. There were similar kind of characters we've seen in global aviation become the face of the airline and almost the airline spokesman. High profile. Hudson is not that. She is low profile. As she said to us, she listens far more than she speaks. So this all tells a story of rebalancing Qantas away from investors and back towards passengers, if you like, swinging that pendulum back. She treads a fine line, and as one analyst told me, it's a delicate needle to thread.
Qantas also has a huge amount of retail investors, right? So a lot of those investors are also passengers. It does sound like it's all in the messaging. She was also on Bloomberg TV this week as well, speaking to us from Toulouse in France. Let's take a quick listen to what she said about the demand for travel now and how that's helping the airline turn around.
We're seeing demand remain strong domestically for both low cost and premium, but also strong outbound as well. So we're feeling really optimistic about the next 6 months and beyond. And the appetite that Australians have for travel has remained strong, and we've seen that now for a number of years.
So, Angus, shareholders seem to like what Vanessa Hudson has been doing. The share price is up more than 70% in the last 12 months, making it the second best performer on the Bloomberg World Airlines Index. What are analysts telling you about their outlook for Qantas's share price going forward?
I think this is one of the great ironies of Hudson's tenure, is that she was brought on essentially to sort of balance the equation a bit more away from investors. And they've ended up having an astonishing 12 months of returns. So as you said, up more than 70%. And if you look at the forecasts, there's more to come. If you look at the market, the 12-month target price among all the analysts that Bloomberg tracks is $10.11. So if you look at the closing price, as we speak, $9.35, the last closing price, this forecast to get to 10.11 in the next 12 months. And if you look at the most optimistic broker in the market, which is Goldman Sachs, they should know what they're talking about, shouldn't they, Goldman?
Right.
$11.80. So there's more to come in terms of investor returns. And then just beyond the naked share price, Hudson has also reinstated the dividend. That's the first time Qantas has paid a normal dividend since before the pandemic. And there's a lot of focus on the sustainability of that dividend. If you look at the kind of the questions that analysts have asked Vanessa Hudson, they want to know, is this a sustainable base from which to assume that dividends will be paid? And I think the answer is yes. As long as Qantas keeps generating the cash, it's in a position now to pay dividends. And that's what's driving some of the share price as well.
And that's what delights investors, right?
That's right.
Getting something back. Let's talk about the challenges now for Qantas, because it's not all beer and Skittles. What are some of the challenges that they're facing as, global economic conditions just seem to be getting more and more volatile as we step further into 2025?
That's right. As well as Hudson has performed, if you look at the bottom line, if you look at the share price and the customer satisfaction metrics, just the raw data of how people assess her performance, she could still come unstuck. There's no doubt. On domestic front, firstly, let's look at the main competitor, Virgin Australia. It's got a new big international shareholder in Qatar Airways. It's buying 25%. And that means that Virgin Australia can open up its international network. It can fly through the Middle East. It can extend routes beyond there using Qatar Airways. It's got a wealthy investor. And there's no doubt that presents a bigger competitive threat to Qantas. So that's on the domestic front. You also have a couple of huge sort of, fleet hurdles to overcome. She has to oversee basically the biggest fleet overhaul in Qantas's history. So she has to get that right, because that really is critical to the whole financial equation when it comes to Qantas in terms of cutting costs, running more efficiently, giving the passenger a better experience. So she has to pay for that firstly. She's also dealing with jet delivery delays, because let's not forget aviation is still going through the kind of the pains of ruptured supply lines, and many of the jets that Qantas has ordered have been delayed. So there's that big fleet overhaul, and probably the highest profile one is the 10-year plan as it is now to operate non-stop flights between Sydney and New York and Sydney and London, what Qantas calls Project Sunrise. And they're going to start in early 2027. It's a flagship project, but the demand for those kind of flights is untested. Like Qantas would argue, and it does often, is that it's confident there's demand because it's looking at the kind of prices people are paying for Perth in Western Australia to London. 17-hour flight, very popular. And Qantas argues that, well, if people want to pay for that kind of flight, then they'll pay for a non-stop Sydney-New York flight. That may be so, but it's an unproven route. And it's got to, analysts are not yet convinced that the demand is there that will make it a viable network.
So you've been covering Qantas for Bloomberg for years, and you've been on Project Sunrise, right? You've taken that flight, that long flight. What do you think? Do you think there's demand for sitting on an aeroplane for that amount of time?
Yeah, that was one of the test flights a few years ago. Of course, it wasn't on an A350 because Qantas doesn't have them yet. That they did these test flights on a Boeing Dreamliner, and they had to cut back on the payload just to
get there. Good, and I'm glad they did, right. Angus.
So, but it was really a test flight to see how the human body held up for a 20-hour trip. And I think the answer is it's okay if you're in business and you're able to afford that premium, and it will be a steep premium over a stop in Singapore, for instance. It may be 20 or 30% steeper. And that's okay if you're willing to pay that. But if you're in economy, then I think it's still an open question as to whether you want to sit in even a more comfortable economy, which Qantas says it will be a little more generous on the legroom. But 20 hours in the back of the plane, I don't know. That's not for me.
It's not for me either. And unlike you, I'm not an active triathlete. But when we come back, let's take a look at what other kinds of changes passengers can expect to see at Qantas in the year ahead. This is the Bloomberg Australia podcast. Welcome back to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. You're here with me, Rebecca Jones, and global business reporter Angus Whitley. Angus, we've got an election coming up in a matter of weeks, and it's going to be largely fought on the cost of living crisis. So let's take a quick listen to what Vanessa Hudson said about demand from Australians for airline travel, despite these daily pressures on our bank accounts.
Really, we're seeing it in all our customer segments. So corporate travel is still recovering and it's growing. We're seeing it in premium leisure. We're seeing it in low cost, particularly. There's a cost of living pressures in Australia like there are in many countries around the world. And despite that, we're still seeing Australians want to take a holiday, whether that be domestically, because Jetstar flies pretty much to all of the leisure destinations domestically, but also internationally to all of the premium destinations that we have, but also into Southeast Asia. Bali is a massive holiday spot. Korea, Vietnam, Japan particularly. We're seeing so many Australians holidaying in Japan.
Angus, why is it that Australians are still prepared to fork out hundreds or thousands of dollars for holiday flights, even though many people are doing it really tough?
There's a few things at play here. I think firstly is, we're a remote population, aren't we? We've always loved to travel, so we're arguably willing to prioritise travel costs above other household expenditure, maybe more than other jurisdictions. If you're in Europe, you don't have to fly to get away. Here, you pretty much do have to fly. And the second reason is we don't really have a choice when it comes to Qantas. We're essentially a two-airline market here. Qantas is the giant in the domestic market. And so if you're going to fly, the chances are you're going to be flying Qantas. So it really has a pretty captive market and a market that likes to fly. And it's been really, you could say, impervious to this cost of living crisis. It's just the flavor at the edges of what we're paying for. For instance, Qantas has that Jetstar brand, it's a low-cost airline, which plays into this cost of living crisis a little bit, but you're still flying Qantas. It's the Qantas group. And so Jetstar has been the beneficiary of that sort of change in taste. If you like, it's carrying a record number of passengers. Its domestic earnings were up more than 50% in the second half of 2024. So you got that at one end. And then at the other end, Qantas has that sort of full service brand that caters to the people who really are impervious to a cost of living crisis, who don't really feel the pinch. And I'd include corporate flyers, wealthy flyers, perhaps retirees that aren't feeling it so much, that haven't felt the raise in interest rates so much. And so if you speak to Hudson, she talks about unprecedented demand for premium travel, and that includes premium economy, business and first class, but also, as we're seeing, record demand in Jetstar as well. So they've cornered the market at both ends, really.
Smart. Now, a big deal has also been made over these new aircraft orders that we mentioned earlier. Can you talk us through what passengers can expect from this upgraded fleet? How is it going to impact our experience when we get to the airport and onto the plane?
Yeah, it's a massive step. As we said, it's Australian aviation's biggest fleet overhaul. And what it involves is newer generation aircraft that, let's just look at it from the Qantas perspective first, newer generation aircraft that are more fuel efficient, that require less maintenance, that offer bigger range, which means more flexibility on the routes that they can fly. And that all adds up to a healthier bottom line. And one of the most, I think, astonishing figures that Qantas has broken out in recent weeks is they've tried to put a dollar number on the benefit to the bottom line, or not so much the bottom line, but certainly one form of earnings, one of the lines, if not the bottom line, that each of these new aircraft offers. And so if you compare the Airbus A321XLR against the 737, which Qantas is replacing, which is the workhorse of the domestic fleet. This is the ones that have been flying for 20 years, scratched, dented, dusty, old, dirty in many cases. You get $5 million down in terms of annual EBITDA for each aircraft that's been replaced. If you go to the A321 long range, that's a $10 million boost there. The A220, which is replacing the Boeing 717, the old 717s, there's a $9 million boost there. So it all flows down to the bottom line. Yes, Qantas has to pay for them, but over the long run, there are savings and there are profit benefits stemming from those replacements. From the customer point of view, you're essentially walking into a brand new aircraft. And this is Qantas addressing what has long been one of its weaknesses, particularly in the domestic front on these old Boeing 737s. They've really a lot of them are coming to the end of their working life, and they're starting to look shabby, particularly when you have a newer, revitalized competitor in Virgin Australia. And so it's also one of the reasons why Boeing is refurbishing some of the 737s that still have a few years left in them. So from Qantas's perspective, it's trying to renew the fleet with new aircraft, but also put a bit more lipstick, if you like, on the older planes to make them appear like new aircraft, even if they're not.
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, I think especially that city flyer route between Sydney and Melbourne, they're turning over those 737s really quickly. A lot of those planes don't have the seatback TV screens, even the cards in the seatback pocket. You can see some of them have seen probably better days. So that's very interesting. And as you say, this is going to mean that eventually it will help the bottom line, one of the bottom lines for Qantas, but also give us that experience of newer planes, which I think is starting to be noticed, right? That's right. And when we sat down with Vanessa Hudson in Hong Kong, one of the things we wanted to know was how sustainable is this performance? Sounds good. And she told us that, well, growth is about investment, she said, and we're investing in the right things. And she means by that this multi-billion-dollar fleet investment, because they deliver these things like a happier customer,
like more reliable services, which then flows down into the bottom line. So it comes back to that balance again of keeping the customer happy, keeping the route running, the network running reliably, which also translates into benefits to shareholders as well.
Now, asking purely out of self-interest, does this investment into fleet renewal, happier customers, booking more trips, does all of this give Qantas any impetus to cut the price of flights?
I think the numbers show that Qantas has little incentive to cut prices, because Australians have proven that they're willing to pay these price points, every price point, from the sub $100 Jetstar fare up to the premium fares, the luxury berths on non-stop flights to Europe or Asia. So the drivers of lower fares are competition, aren't they, primarily? And we may see that if Virgin Australia starts to become a stronger competitor that has a better international offering, then yes, we might see Qantas fares start to respond to that. And as capacity comes back and on international networks, that will also inevitably drive down prices. Yeah, I'd also say that one of the factors driving up fares at the moment is the lack of capacity. So we should see fares start to have room to come down when there is more capacity in the market. And that's a global problem that aviation faces. There just are not enough planes to meet demand at the moment.
Angus Whitley, thank you for joining me. And thank you for listening to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. I'm Rebecca Jones. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It was produced by Paul Allen and edited by Chris Burke and Ainsley Chandler. Don't forget to follow and review the show wherever you get your podcasts and sign up for Bloomberg's free daily newsletter, Australia Briefing. Go to bloomberg.com to subscribe.